Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're continuing our talks on God of War, with us getting into the first 2018 God of War tie-in that takes place a little over 100 years after God of War Fallen God. So for this one, I want to talk about the timeline a little bit, as well as some of the challenges that Kratos faces after trying to start his life over in this new land. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so before we get into this, I first want to talk about a foreword that it came out along with this series that was provided by Cory Barlog, the director of 2018 God of War, and it goes on to read, quote, "I've loved comics since I was back in high school. The magic of New Comic Book Day was always the highlight of my week, even when it involved walking a mile each way in the cold Chicago winters. It was all worth it, though, because for the next few days I would be plucked from the cold suburban reality of Wheaton, Illinois, and transported to the dark, crime-ridden streets of Gotham or the much brighter metropolis of Spider-Man's New York. Comic books gave me so many worlds that helped make the sometimes difficult real world easier to bear. The creation of comic books, however, has always been a mysterious, dark art whose secrets seem to forever elude me. This is why I was initially a little nervous about the idea of exploring the medium with our newly reimagined world, but when I found out who we were going to be working with, that trepidation immediately gave way to what I only can describe as fanboy levels of giddiness. This collection represents the first phase of expanding the universe of God of War. There are so many stories to tell about the journey of Kratos, and it is incredibly humbling to have talented creators taking the first steps. I'm still not sure how we tricked them into doing it, but I'm not one to question such good fortune. I will just remain, however, thankful that the always amazing Chris Robertson, Tony Parker, Dan Jackson, John Rochelle, and Ian Gist were the first to bring this new take on God of War into the annals of comic book history. The story these brilliant artists created is a run that gives us a glimpse of where the relationship is between Kratos and Atreus before the loss of Faye. We get a very raw look at how much work he still has ahead of him, both as father and a human being. They were able to, through this collaboration of writer and artist, get inside the head of Kratos and Atreus in a way that is just not possible in the game. What is so inspiring about this to me is that we're only seeing a small piece of the much larger puzzle, which illuminates the intense character growth Kratos underwent after fleeing the smoldering ashes of Greece in search of a better way. I am so proud to have played even a small role in this process, and I am beyond excited about the wealth of the potential stories that we can tell in the future. Thank you to the fans all over the world. Your continued support fuels our creative engines and is truly the foundation of our ability to continue telling stories that move us." End quote. And yeah, with this being the foreword to this series, I gotta say it does a really good job at priming the reader for what's to come. But it's here where we jump in, where we find out that for Kratos, who at this point has built his home in the wildwoods with Faye, which according to the God of War Lore and Legends book, Kratos had made his way to the Northlands in general 115 years ago, to where then for about 75 years, he meets a number of monsters and creatures, but for the most part he avoids people, until he meets Faye, who at the time Kratos had quickly befriended because the both of them were warriors and they both were sick of war and violence. And for Kratos, 5 years after meeting Faye, the two of them had built a home together in the wildwoods, and Faye marked off the area with her magical stave, which we would recognize as her yellow handprint, in order to hide their home from the sight of all gods and monsters. But also during this time with the two of them living together, Kratos shares with Faye everything about his past, but she never tells him why she's in Midgard. But then from here, 22 years later, Atreus is born, and his birth is 13 years before the beginning of God of War 2018. But again, with us using the God of War Lore and Legends book as a bit of a reference for the timeline, we're not given a specific time on when this takes place, but if I had to guess, I'd say that Atreus is about 11, maybe 12, since in his 13th year, he speaks of his mother dying a year ago, and at this point when we jump in, Faye is still alive. But I just wanted to mention this kind of to give an idea as far as where we're at when we find Kratos, which at this point is over 100 years past where we had seen him last when we had our talks about God of War Fallen God. But it's here we find that every day Kratos would head out into the woods in search of a challenge, and every day he would find it. But we follow him this particular time after he's returned home and he's tending to his wounds, and Faye's trying to guess what he went out there and fought this time, and she guesses bears, but it was actually wolves. But with seeing this, it's hard to tell if Faye really knew what it really was at this point, because with time we do discover that Faye knows more than what she actually shares. But with how this moment is presented to us, it's given from the perspective of Kratos, who believes that Faye thinks that he's always going out there every day looking for a fight. But as Kratos would express, that's just not the case. because for him at this point it's more of a proving of his discipline, and the way he would do this is with going out into the wild woods, allowing these wolves to attack him while not fighting back, in order to prove to himself that he can control his rage rather than his rage control him. But another thing I want to point out here with Kratos tending to his wounds, because we know that Kratos can heal himself, we've seen it in the games, as well as Cory Barlog, the director of 2018 God of War, he's mentioned it and talked about it before as well. But with what we're seeing here, though it's not thoroughly explained in this moment, I'd like to think at this point in time that this is a part of Kratos punishing himself and feeling the cost of him losing control. So on a day like this, after going into the wild woods, being attacked, and failing at withholding his rage, this is how he ends his day, owning the defeat and starting all over the next day. But it's here as Faye tells Kratos that their supper is almost ready, and we see Kratos think back on that wolf attack and how he had let those wolves throw at him all that they had until they tired themselves out. And for Kratos, had it ended there, this day for him would have been a victory. But instead, the day did not end there, and a couple of trolls walked up on him and they wanted some smoke too. And really for Kratos, for him, this was the real test. And it's not the one that he had set up for himself, but it's the one that found him. And after killing both of these trolls and only having the scars on him from the wolves, so this is a flawless victory we're talking about here. But because Kratos lost control to his rage, he had seen this as a failure. So back home, when Faye calls in Atreus for dinner and she tells him that his father's worked up an appetite after fighting a pack of wolves, which again is what Kratos had came home and said. But after hearing this, of course Atreus is excited and he tells his father that he knows he left the house with no weapon. And he asks, did you win a fight with a pack of wolves with your bare hands? But Kratos turns around and he goes off on Atreus and he lets him know that he's missing the whole point. And he tells Atreus that he defeated his enemies, but he lost the only battle that truly mattered, against himself. And also, this is the lesson that Kratos would hope to teach to Atreus, but he doesn't stress it too much here because Atreus has yet to start his training. But then after this, we then go over to the next morning, after Kratos is woken up and he finds Atreus outside just playing. But when Kratos gets up, Faye's already gone. So he asks Atreus where's his mother, and Atreus lets him know that his mother had waken up early, she went out to hunt, and she said she'd be back by nightfall. And of course, Kratos knows that that's not all that she said, because there's no way that Faye is just gonna up and leave without giving Atreus some type of chore or something to do. And from there, Atreus, he does admit that his mother told him to chop some firewood, and when he tells Kratos, he's more or less in response like, okay, we'll get to it. And he tells Atreus to make sure by the time that he gets back that he has a good amount of work done. But after this, Kratos heads back out into the wild woods to test himself yet again. Though at this point, he does feel like Atreus had tested him just a little bit already. But with Kratos heading out, he finds a stag that has been spooked. And with seeing this, he hopes to find what spooked the stag, in hopes that that predator may be his next test. But from here, he finds more wolves. And with seeing them, initially he begins to engage. But when they approach him and he thinks back, and he remembers the trolls that he had fought, and he also remembers the wolves he had trained with before and how they were killed by these trolls after standing with Kratos in that fight. And with remembering this, he chooses not to engage with these wolves, at least not today. And again, with Kratos using reason over his primitive instinct, he's able to walk away and call this another victory between him and the war with his own rage, with the god of war being at war with his own self. But after this, while Kratos is heading home, he sees a man getting mauled by a bear, like straight up Revenant style. And initially Kratos, he just keeps moving. He's like, that ain't my problem. Worry about yourself. But with him hearing this dude crying out in a language that he doesn't understand, because Kratos hasn't learned to read the runes yet, let alone speak the native tongue. But even still, Kratos can imagine what this guy's probably saying. And for a moment, Kratos thinks to himself, could this be the test that he's looking for? But even still, with him watching and debating whether or not he should intervene, he feels the rage and fury inside struggling to break free. And even though he feels that, he still jumps in to help this guy out. And when he does, this goes by rather quickly, and he ends up tearing off this bear's jaw. And I gotta admit, with going back and reading this, I'm kinda glad that Kratos doesn't kill bears this fast anymore. But nonetheless, with him ending this bear quickly, Kratos walks away cursing the bear and the old man who's getting beat up by the bear, because that old man aroused his sympathy to where Kratos couldn't resist but to help. And for that reason, Kratos curses himself, because yet again his rage had gotten the best of him. So for him, this is yet again another day that he's failed himself. But after this, with Kratos making his way back home, he passes through the protection barrier that was created by Faye, but with doing so, he's watched and followed. But from here, when we see Kratos get home, we find Atreus outside playing in that same spot, and he ain't chopped one lick of firewood all day. But Kratos sees this and he more or less just grunts, and he asks Atreus if his mother's came back yet, since at this point it's nightfall. So Kratos tells Atreus to hurry up and cut some wood before his mom gets home, but before Kratos walks inside, he hears a twig snap, indicating that footsteps are approaching, and he turns around to find these strangers who had seen him kill that bear follow him home. But of course, Kratos, he has no clue who these guys are or why they come here. And on top of that, he doesn't even understand the words that are coming out of their mouth. But Atreus, on the other hand, he understands them well. And he tells Kratos that they said they killed their brother and they've come here for revenge. But with Kratos hearing this, he doesn't recall killing anyone's brother, but he lets these guys know if they're coming here looking for a fight, he's gonna give it to him. But as soon as he says this, two of these guys from the group, they turn into bears and they come for him. So right away, Kratos begins to fight them off, and he tells Atreus to quickly get to safety, since at this point, Atreus really hasn't been trained yet. And at this time, the only experience Atreus really has is hunting with his mother, to where even then, she would handle the killing. But even with Kratos telling Atreus to get to safety, there's really nowhere for him to go at this point. And at a moment's notice, one of these guys gets ready to attack Atreus, defenseless young Atreus. But of course, Kratos, he ain't having that. So then he turns around and Kratos gives this bear a bear hug. And I'm talking about a tight one. Like, this bear was snatched for like 2 seconds. But even still at this point, with one of these guys down and one more to go, because the older stranger, he's really just watching this whole time. But for Kratos, he doesn't know that these guys are actually members of a rare group of berserkers who draw their strength from animal spirits. But of course, at this point, Kratos don't care much about that because he's getting manhandled. But at a moment's notice, he grabs a nearby axe and he splits this dude's wig. But from here, the third member of this mysterious group, he tells Kratos that he's going to pay for spilling the blood of his brothers, and when he returns, he's going to bring the rest of his clan with him. And of course, with him saying this, Kratos is able to understand because Atreus is there and he's translating the whole thing. But with this guy taking off, this leader of this group of berserkers, it's a huge problem for a number of reasons. Because first and foremost, he knows where Kratos and his family lives, and for that reason, Kratos has got to make sure that he chases this guy down and ends this guy so he doesn't bring back more berserkers to his home. But also, Kratos has to make sure to bring Atreus with him, because the safest place for his son right now is at his father's side and away from their home, because if the berserkers return there and Kratos isn't home, it's going to be a problem. But then lastly, we also find that the trail for this stranger goes cold, which now begs the question, how far will Kratos go to protect his family? And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.